This one I'm very happy to say I'm able to blame Canada for the talk. The reason being that I took marine biology in Banfield in 1996, the fall program there, and then in 97 I was able to work at Triangle Island with Doug Bertram to study the alcids there, and that experience led me to working with alcids in the Baltic Sea. And I see April here in the talk also, who I know has been working with Doug. So nice to sort of be back in Canada and to talk about what we have done since, well, 98, I guess, when I started doing my I started my master's on this project. So yeah, let's see. This is one of my colleagues looking out at common guillemots, common mers, the alcids that we mostly work with. And I'll tell you more about the structure that she's looking out from soon, but I'll just start with showing you what she's looking at. I mean, you get a sense, but this is the proximity to the birds that we're working with and just a general feeling of the colony and the animals. So those are a bunch of adults in the back and a chick in the front there. And of course, you're not really sure if it's them that's observing us or if us who is observing them or both. But the point that we try to make is that seabirds really are interesting study objects, not just because they're fun and interesting in general, but they also can tell us a lot about what's happening in the ocean underneath the surface. And they can also help us understand marine food webs. And I'm sure much of this is very basic to you, but still, just to make sure that we're all on the same page, it's seabirds spend most of the time at sea, and they come ashore for a short breeding period during the summer, which in Sweden, I guess, pretty similar to Canada. April, May, June. They lay their eggs and they have hatch their chicks, and the chicks leave their nest, and then they spend the rest of the year offshore feeding on small forage fish, which of course in turn are very much dependent on zooplankton, animal plankton, which in turn are very much dependent on phytoplankton. So given that seabirds are part of the food chain and they're also influenced by what's happening in the ecosystems, that means that they're also subject to changes driven by fisheries and climate change and what have you. So one of our main reasons to study the seabirds in this project that has run since 1997 is really to understand how can we ensure their long-term survival, and how can we help get a better understanding of what's happening in the ecosystem, and can we come up with interesting new ways of managing marine resources in ways that ecosystem structure and function is intact. The project was initiated by a colleague, Olof Olsson, and he was also my supervisor. He has a background working with king penguins in the Antarctica, and much of this work now is being led by my colleague Jonas and Tati Sundberg. So I'm not taking credit for all this. There's a lot of people who's been working on this, and Jonas is the key person driving this now. But I'm sort of still involved to some extent, and I've spent quite a few hours in this colony. And I'll come back to the colony and what we're doing there. But just like one reason to study this group of animals, the alcids, the family of puffins, and also of the common guillemots or the common mers that we are studying in the Baltic, is because, of course, these are circumpolar species. And here you have the Baltic Sea here, and our little study colony is down here. But the red circles in this graph illustrate sort of the global distribution of common mur colony, with the size of the circle corresponding to the size of the colony. And then you have these blue circles, which are a very similar species, but more of an Arctic version of it, the thick-billed mur, that also resides in the same region, but further north. So it's a circumpolar species, so we're also trying to learn from collaborating with other colleagues and share observations and share our understanding of how the species can be used to understand ecosystems. One approach to this went beyond just this family of birds, but looking at birds that occupy a similar ecological niche, basically fish-eating seabirds around the world. And we worked in a project, it's quite a few years old now, but just to illustrate the kinds of work that we hope to engage in with this project, really to create these global comparative studies of how are seabirds influenced by changes in the prey stock abundance. And here you see the geographical location of a number of different colonies and species of seabirds. And we had information, long-term information on both the breeding success of the birds as well as the food resources that they were dependent on. A lot of times at a very coarse scale, but still in this little study that was led by Philippe Curie with lots of seabird colleagues, we were able to document some similarities in the approach or sort of in the response of seabirds to changes in their fish stock abundance. And this graph basically illustrates how above sort of a normalized value or abundance of prey stock, the breeding success is quite stable across regions and across species, whereas under this sort of value, there's a relatively rapid decline in the breeding success of seabirds. So we were hoping that we could use this information as a way to come up with more generalized rule for how to sort of conserve biomass in order to secure sort of biological productivity of seabirds. So this is an attempt to not just look into the Baltic Sea and the specific species, but also look wider to see how our observations can help add value to sort of a general understanding of marine ecosystems. So that's a bit on the sort of the general value of seabirds as indicators, and that's lots of work to do there, of course. But I wanted to talk more specifically about our project in the Baltic Sea and how our sort of it continues to be a pilot project, and we continue to pilot some ideas that we're excited about. And I wanted to share some of the things that we have learned from that. So here again, you have the Baltic Sea, Sweden here, Finland here, and Norway here. And then this little area here corresponds to the area here to the right. And this island here is, of course, this island here. And our seabird colony is situated just like half an hour boat ride from the main island. Here you have a graph just illustrating the depth distribution in relation to the island. But the seabirds breed here, and they forage in this larger area during the breeding season, and in the entire southern Baltic Sea during the winter time. So this is what the colony looks like. It's a pretty healthy and thriving colony. There's lots of resources in the Baltic Sea. One reason being there's lots of nutrients in the Baltic Sea. Another reason being that a large proportion of the predatory fish stock cod has been historically depleted. So there's quite abundant resources of forage fish, and there's also a reduction or elimination of many of the threats to seabirds in the region. But it hasn't always been like that. This is a picture just from last year or so. But about 100 years ago, this colony was almost extinct, much as a result of egging and hunting. And this little graph illustrates a reconstruction of the historical population in the colony. By the late 1800s, there were very, very few pairs here. And then by studying historical photographs of visitors that come to this island, and most of them take pictures in the exact same spot, we are able to reconstruct the population trends more generally. And we've also sort of connected the last few years with information on actual inventory. So basically a largely increasing population, much as a result then of multiple factors. Of course, lots of food, a reduction or a banning of hunting and egging, also a reduction, very clear reduction of impact from dioxins and DDTs, and also banning of drift gill nets, and a rapid reduction of the use of bottom set gill nets for cod, but also salmon gill nets as a result of depletion of those prey fish stocks. So not too many threats, and pretty good conditions for the birds in the region. So what we do then is, the classic ecology. When we're in the colony, this is a colony where there's lots of tourists that come, and they always ask you, so what are you doing? Are you counting birds? And sure, we're counting birds, and we're also have been systematically collecting many of these sort of classic field ecology parameters, like breeding success, obviously, try to understand the productivity of the colony, doing inventory, understanding how many adult breeding birds there are, and also understanding timing and breeding and some of these basic phenology questions, just to get a better feeling for the productivity and dynamics of the colony. And if you visit the website of the project, balticseabird.com, there's lots of different sort of online available data sets that you can play around with and download and understand more about what's happening in this colony. We've also done sort of a number of studies trying to understand interconnectivity of seabirds with the rest of the ecosystems, and this is something I spent a lot of time on in my PhD thesis, where we were convinced that this increased abundance of food, of increasing prey fish stocks, would lead to fatter and heavier chicks. But instead we found that chicks were actually decreasing in body mass as they left the nests over a 10-year time period during the entire 1990s. And in order to understand that sort of surprising results, why are the chicks thinner when there's more food, we understood the dynamics were related to basically competition between the forage fish stocks for their prey. So all the forage fish, although abundant, were much more leaner, with much lower energy content than what they had before. So basically, we were trying to figure out how the decline of seabird chicks when they leave the nest really was a result of a combination of overfishing that drove the predatory fish stocks, cod, down, which led to a rapid increase in the forage fish sprat, but that led to competition in sprat. So the sprat got leaner at the same time where the salinity levels of the Baltic Sea were declining, which led to a reduction of the zooplankton. So less food for more sprat led to thinner sprat and sort of lighter chicks. So really trying to untangle some of the dynamics in the food web has been something that we have been playing around with a lot, but also being very aware of the fact that some of the information that we have on prey fish stocks and predator fish stocks are at much larger geographical scale than the foraging area of the seabird. So really try to work with data that really has a poor geographical and temporal overlap was one of the challenges, but still identifying some of those trends and trying to piece together the puzzle of the Baltic Sea food web. This is a long time ago, and Jonas has been doing similar studies trying to understand the dynamics of the food web. But this study, which is I think a really nice one that he published in 2020, we had sort of bird enthusiasts visiting the colony, and they were remarking on the amazing abundance of house martins in the lighthouse. And it was apparently the largest colony of house martins in the country. We had no idea, and we were trying to figure out what the reasons for this were. And then we were using isotope studies to document sort of the nutrient, the excrement from the guillemots on the breeding ledges really fertilized the near coastal zones and led to really good conditions for these larvae that the house martin feeds on. So this sort of nice marine terrestrial cascade was another little study that we did to understand the role of the guillemots in feeding these nutrient loops. But in addition to these sort of more classical sort of field observations and understanding interactions, we've been experimenting with a couple of different ways to, on the one hand, get closer to the birds, and on the other hand, get a better understanding of what's happening during underneath the surface. And already when the project started, Olof thought that it'd be really nice to build an artificial breeding ledge. He had been working with some really interesting automatic scales when he worked with king penguins in South Georgia, in Antarctica, and he wanted to construct a big breeding ledge, which I thought was a completely moronic idea, basically, and it was impossible to do it, I thought, and it was impossible to get funding. Maybe that tells you more about my ability to think out of the box, but anyway, 10 years later, Jonas, who's now leading the project, was able to both secure funding, contract an architect, and a construction company that was able to build this breeding ledge. And now that breeding ledge is one of the key pieces of infrastructure that we have, and that will give us, an enormous kind of access to the birds that enables lots of studies that were completely impossible before. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that soon. Olof also in 1998 was really frustrated with the fact that, like, the troll survey that documents forage fish abundance and quality was conducted once a year, mostly in October, at the entire Baltic Sea scale, and that was like really not the best match with our breeding season studies during June and July. I thought it was fine to use the existing survey data. Again, you can tell that I was happy with what we had. But then Jonas has been doing a lot of really interesting work and piloting. I think he's on this third generation of offshore drones now that is starting to collect some really neat information at high resolution. So these are some of the ideas initiated by Olof and sort of not taken on by me, but instead taken on by Jonas and really developing it to what I think is now a pretty interesting testing bed for collecting and analyzing ecosystem data with new technologies. So here's a sort of a during construction process to illustrate the sort of the framework or the scaffolding, the sort of the internal structure of the breeding ledge. It was sort of mounted on the island in 2008, and we primarily used traditional building technologies that are that people are familiar with on this island. So it's like traditional fishing houses, and the material is all low emission materials, and the ambition is that we can take this ledge down in 30 years time, and the only thing that it will leave is 2 squares about this big with the concrete foundations for the bottom, the base of the ledge. But just to illustrate what it actually looks like, here's the ledge photographs from the beach, and there are like 3 different floors on the inside that we as studiers of the birds or study objects of the bird can occupy. And the ledges here on the outside represent lots of breeding room for common merce, but we've also constructed a number of nest boxes for razorbill, which is another closely related alcid. And here you see the sort of the one of the legs. There are 2 legs here that's sort of anchored to the mountain, and then there are wires on the back here that pulls the ledge back. Here's another picture from a little bit of a distance. You see that it's an oak tree, so it's starting to age and starting to gray to look very similar to the mountain. And before we mounted this ledge, there were no breeding ledges here, so it's a new habitat. And I think now we have 93 breeding pairs of common guillemots, so there's quite a big sample. after a few years. So we used to call it the MER lab, but now we have two types of ALCIDs, not just MER, so now it's the AUK lab. We've been installing lots of different equipment here to be able to monitor the birds in real time, and also to record observations on video that we can then come back to and engage with. And these, see, I can get these guys to move. You get these are two 3D model of the ledges, and these models are also available on the website in case you want to play around with this yourself. And now we've also annotated these little 3D models with more information, and you can sort of click and learn more about different aspects. So this is like work in progress, but at least you get a feeling for what the ledge actually looks like and what we're hoping to achieve with it. Yeah, you get the basic idea, I think. So yeah, I mean, one reason to have this ledge is that we want to be able to put equipment on the birds without disturbing the entire colony. And we also want to be able to retrieve birds that we have put equipment on. So what, I mean, even though there's a breeding ledge around the outside of the ledge, there's also barriers between different segments. So you can focus on disturbing just 1 meter and just catch birds there, and the birds around will not notice that you're doing something to their neighbors. So it's an opportunity for us to really focus activities on disturbing very local parts. But we're also able to, I mean, sometimes it can be really challenging to recover birds and transmitters, but with this setup, we're able to, you know, the birds, they breed in one location and they keep on spending their entire season, and most of the time, several seasons in the exact same location. So it's really easy for us to just sort of tag and recover information. And it could be GPS loggers that help us understand at a very fine level where they're foraging, but also lots of other equipment that can help us understand diving activity at a really high temporal and spatial resolution. We've also, given that we have these CCTVs mounted on the ledge, which means that of course we can document and study the birds, but it's also an opportunity to engage an interesting public in what the birds are doing. And of course, there's lots of fun activities to observe during the breeding seasons. And this is a citizen science project that we have been piloting with the World Wildlife Fund, where people can watch live streams of the different ledges. And here you have sort of observations that people have reporting in if birds are mating, or if they have, so if they see an egg or a chick, they can report that in. So this becomes like an interface for us to get more eyes on the ledges and to document timing and breeding success and so on in some details, and also engaging people in conversations about that. So that's been fun. We've also been working with a company called AI Innovation Sweden that has been developing lots of algorithms for image recognition, and they have helped us. This is a few years old now, but they have, so we've collected lots of information, of course, from the cameras, and then we have tried to automate some of the observations, and then we have spent a lot of time sort of proofing and checking observations that are automated, just to make sure that we train the algorithm to collect the right information. Is it an adult? Is it a chick? And so on. So this is a few years old, but we were excited about the fact that we can do new things with the cameras and also automate some of the observations. This is more from this year, much more sort of, yeah, better algorithms, lots more opportunity to collect more information, and they're becoming smarter. So we're able to, yeah, on the one hand, it can now understand if it's an adult, if it's a chick, or if it's an egg. And we're also measuring the size of the boxes around the birds, which we can then use to document growth increases during the time, or changes in weight of both adults and chicks. This is another example of sort of equipment that we can install on the ledge. Here we have this little platform that weighs the adult. Here you see the weight here on the scale, and then we can also automate the reading of the ring of the bird. So we get like automatically we get a feeling for the weight of the bird as it leaves and as it arrives, and we can document each individual. And here you have sort of weight of one individual over a period of 2 months, just being collected systematically during time here. Here's information from this. I was talking about the size of the boxes that are being documented, and these sizes have we used that as a proxy for the growth of the chick over time, and we've of course also been sort of checking that by weighing the chick every day manually by hand and correlating the sort of the actual weight to the bounding box. Here you see it's a pretty good correlation of so it works as a good measure. But these are all things in development and things that are being fine-tuned, but we're starting to see some of the potential in collecting lots of information at very high resolution with zero disturbance, basically, which is exciting. Another thing that we have been doing is we've mounted a heat sensory camera to try to understand the heat exposure to the birds. If you're familiar with altids, you see that these guys here with their mouth open, they're clearly heat stressed, and yeah, we've been trying to document the adult attendance, and most of the times, of course, at least one adult is present. But during some of these, you just dropped an egg there. During these really high temperature stresses, we had lots of breeding failures because both adults basically left the nest and let the chick or the egg sit out in the sun, which was clearly not good for them. Yeah, and then so lots of different things that we're doing with the new ledge and the cameras and the image recognition software. And then we've also been using this solar-powered drone. And the nice thing with this is that it carries the exact same equipment as the big research vessel does when it comes to documented what's underneath the surface. The cool thing is that it doesn't make any noise, so it doesn't scare any fish away. So I think we're collecting really high resolution data on fish stock abundance, and of course we're able to control its sailing. So we're sailing this to where the birds are, and given that we have both information on where the birds forage, the depths at which they're diving, the conditions when they are sort of arriving in the colony, and their sort of growth rates of chicks and conditions of adults, combining that with really high resolution and completely overlapping information on fish stocks abundance is something that we're very excited about, and that creates lots of fun conditions for understanding ecosystem interactions at high resolution. Yeah, here's just an illustration of some of the different layers, some of the different depths, and also we're able to really document at high resolution the diurnal migration of some of these animals that are either prey to the birds or are doing other things. So yeah, this is still work in progress, and we're still in the process of analyzing this and finding good partners to I mean, we have just such an enormous amount of data, and so if you have any ideas on colleagues who are working on these kinds of assessment and methodologies, then that'd be really welcome for us to partner up and learn more about how we can interpret some of this information. Just finally, we're also, I mean, we're collecting so much information, so we're also thinking of ways to sort of store and manage and analyze it, and also to, I mean, our field ecology study has become very technology intensive, so people who work in the field are also experts in splicing cables and doing all kinds of interesting technological solutions. So I think we really are building a diverse team of field ecologists and technology people. And we just had a workshop last week, and there was a couple of volunteers who, one was like a self-driving car AI guy who just liked the project so much. So he volunteers in it. But I think it's nice the way we're able to build lots of different capacities to be able to work both with relevant ecological questions and use the best technologies out there to find new kinds of answers to them. So that's also exciting, as well as partnering with new kinds of institutions like the AI Innovation Group here in Sweden, Google, and so on, to get more computing power. And of course, we're not just collecting this because we think it's fun and that we're interested in the birds and that we want to get a better spatial resolution and more data of everything. We think there's lots of things we can learn from this that is of relevance for other field studies. I think this is an opportunity to really accelerate collection and analysis of ecological data. And we think that there's also some really nice opportunities to use these new technologies and feed them into sort of models and understanding the dynamics of ecosystems, and preferably, ideally, combine some of this real-time monitoring data and ecosystem understanding with real-time understanding of what humans are doing when it comes to fishing vessels and ship traffic and so on, in order to support some kind of an adaptive real-time spatial management of marine ecosystems, where you really manage trade-offs in real time somehow. So that's sort of our longer term, very vague goal, but I think we're starting to develop technologies that speak to each other and that are operating at scales where it really makes sense to start thinking about how to use it for defining some of these management rules, which is exciting and something we also would like to partner up with other colleagues to learn more of how it can be done. And finally, we're also working together now with both colleagues in Australia and also with some colleagues to you, most likely in Hudson Bay, to use the drone and to start collecting information and to really compare the dynamics of the incredibly disturbed Baltic Sea, where you have overfishing and eutrophication and lots of signals from climate change, to a study like on Coates Island on Hudson Bay, where you have, completely different, much less disturbed, more pristine, if you will, ecosystem, at least if you compare it to the Baltic Sea. So I think this is something that we're trying to figure out how to partner and how to learn how we can sort of apply this technology in other contexts and in other areas. Here's this is the guy I'm talking about, Jonas, who's leading much of this work. Astrid is his PhD student that does a lot of this work as well. And then I'm sure you recognize some of the other people in this gang. And this is field ecology in Stora Karlsö. We started out with a pair of binoculars and walking around looking at birds, and now we have this sort of, you don't need to go outside. I don't know if that's a good thing. But yeah, this is part of the reality now, really trying to create get the technology to work and talk to each other, and also finding partners and new ways of analyzing and understanding what's happening out there in the ecosystems. It's funded by lots of different colleagues of organizations in Sweden. The WWF in Sweden has been funding us consistently since 1998. But more recently, we've been able to secure more funding to take this project to the next level. It's mostly, I'm based at Stockholm Resilience Center, Stockholm University, and that's part of the project. But the Swedish Agricultural University, SLU, is where Jonas is based, and that's one of the main homes of the university. And then we also work very closely with Stora Karlsö. This is the island and the organization that manages that island. It's been a nature reserve since the late 1800s, so there's a long history of humans and ecosystem studies here. So it's nice to partner up and work with this group, and it's also an opportunity for us, since there's so many tourists that visit this island, for us to interact with them and to engage tourists in catching birds and to really communicate our science, which we think is always very fun and exciting. Yeah, here's just a silly image of my colleagues hanging out in this in the ledge. But yeah, thanks for paying attention. Here's that's what I had.